Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And what I'm going to talk about today is Industry 4.0 and some of the challenges of this not so new technology. And I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about the technology side, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the supply side of this particular technology and some of the things and some of the tools that we need to pay attention to and how we should organize and so forth. So some of the topics that I'm going to cover will be some general applications of Industry 4.0. I'll talk a little bit about the challenges of supply chain systems design. Talk about some of the characteristics of smart supply chain management and some of the tools that we need to develop or implement in order for us to be successful in this so-called Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution. So the first thing that I would like to bring to your attention is the time frame that has taken place between the first and the second industrial revolution, the second and the third. So you'll see there about 100 years between each one of these. So between the first and the second and the third, about 100 years. But then it only took about 50 or so years, maybe not even, for the fourth industrial revolution to take place. And so, as you can see, the transformation or the need to bring about transformation to manufacturing and other sectors, the time frame is becoming shorter and shorter. And as I will conclude today's presentation, we are already thinking about Industry 5.0. So if we look at some of the general applications of that has where the digital industrial transformation has taken place, we see that there's no industry out there that has not been affected by Industry 4.0. From manufacturing to energy sector to power sector, transportation, healthcare systems, and so forth. And what you see above here are some of the different sectors that have where we show some smart applications being used. Some of the main technologies that have taken place in Industry 4.0 is the Internet of Things. And Internet of Things is basically technology that allows for all devices to be connected. So this is not, I guess, the time to talk about the specifics of Internet of Things, but let's just say that Internet of Things is a technology that allows all different types of devices to be connected and communicate with each other and make decisions in real time. So all different types of industries, as I mentioned, have been affected. As you can see here, different types of businesses, as well as customers, whether they are internal, external customers to a particular system, have been affected by this digital transformation. Some of the benefits that we have already realized through Industry 4.0 deal with quality issues, deal with response time, deal with safety. So we have increased safety, productivity, and so forth through Industry 4.0 to a very large degree, particularly in the manufacturing sector. By leveraging some of the technologies, such as smart sensors and large data systems and so forth, we've been able to increase manufacturing output by roughly about 40% or so just in the last 2 decades. Just in the last 2 decades, we've been able to increase productivity output by roughly about 40% or so in the US. This is in the United States. So 40% or so increase in output. What we are looking at is an increase in value added in the manufacturing sector once we develop enough. And when AI, when artificial intelligence is diffused significantly enough in the manufacturing sector. So this is what we are projecting to add in terms of value added to the manufacturing sector by the year 2025, though it may take a little bit more time than that, but shortly within the next decade or so, we'll be able to do that. So, so we see the benefits of using these various different types of technologies and so forth, but the challenges of using them, developing them, and so forth are significant. And so, what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the characteristics of some of these technologies in order for us to be able to successfully develop and implement them. So if we, and I know there's some of the audience that I'm addressing today that have interest in supply chain, these findings, these different remarks that I'm going to be making are based on a study that was done by IBM, and the research methodology was done mainly through interviewing about 400 or so top executives at various different companies about their supply chain systems. And the findings from that particular study indicated 5 different areas in which each one of these executives found challenges, and they ranked as the top most areas that where these top executives are finding challenges. And the first one, and they are not in particular order, I'll comment a little bit more about excuse me, which one is the top and which one is the second and so forth as I go along. But the first one, and the first one is cost containment. And so this is an area where executives have always put a lot of emphasis, cost containment. And so they used to be able to come up with process improvements and design efficient supply chain systems and so forth. And they also have had quite a bit of success in containing costs in these type of systems. With recent with recent changes in various commodity pricing and some of the energy energy pricing fluctuations and so forth, they're finding it more difficult. And so to be able to contain cost. And so most of the programs, or most of the time that they spend is reacting more so than planning. And so that's what they spend most of their activities and their busy time reacting to some of these changes, fluctuations in or so-called volatility in various different types of costs. So that's one area that is very challenging, and that based on the survey, the results of the survey that was conducted, they spend most of their time doing. So this does not mean that it is the most important area, but it is an important area that they consider is their primary job. And so, and we'll get back to this particular concept in during the course of this presentation. But cost containment is something that they again spend most of the time being involved in, and the type of activities also. If you look at the 2 or 3 top activities that they put as far as the top activities that they're involved in, they all deal with cost containment in terms of process improvement or developing efficient supply chain systems and so forth. So, but you would see that a lot of other type of planning is kind of left to 3rd or 4th or 5th category in terms of them paying attention to it. So they spend a lot of time doing this as opposed to other types of things that are important in a in the design of an adequate supply chain system. So the other category that challenges them is information management, and or so-called in some of the literature as visibility. So today, the amount of information that is available to managers and executives and so forth is huge. The connectivity or the technology that allows us to be able to be connected exists. So the challenge is not so much the fact that information is not available. It's not so much that we cannot connect different silos of entities or organizations that have to have the information. It's mining the correct type of information and making correct decisions out of that information that is being mined. So, or capturing, if you want, the right type of information and making use of it, making good decisions based on correct information in real time. So that's an area that is, as a matter of fact, this particular area, or so-called visibility area, according to the survey, they find it the most challenging. They found it to be the most challenging area of all these 5 different areas here that are mentioned. So if we focus a little bit more on the visibility or information management within a certain organization, we find that takes probably about the 4th, maybe the 5th priority within all the different tasks that these executives undertake in a given day. Because remember, we talked about cost containment, and we said that they spend most of their time reacting to fluctuations in prices and so forth, so making adjustments on a day-to-day basis and so forth. So because of that, the internal management of information, though it is better than external management of information, that is sharing information with outside entities, with other partners and so forth, still managing the information within a certain organization still is not a top priority. It is a very important problem, but it doesn't take the number 1 priority, other than cost containment, which they feel, as I mentioned, is their first priority. So another category of challenge facing them, they mentioned, according to this survey, and it was quite a significant survey, about 400 or so of them, as I mentioned, were surveyed. Risk management. So in today's global supply chain system, risk exists and have become more significant, particularly that a change in any part of the supply chain system can create, or has the potential to create, a disturbance in other parts of the supply chain. And therefore, though a large portion of them, roughly about 68% or so, or close to 68%, indicated that they do monitor risk in a formal way or in a formal fashion. Only about half of that, or only half of the respondents, indicated that they do take into account performance and manage risk at the same time or concurrently. So though they manage risks, they don't necessarily take risk into account from a performance standpoint, or as I mentioned before. So they basically indicate also that there are inadequate technologies or processes for them to manage risks. So in other words, there's not standard processes that allow them to be able to manage risk as per their feedback. So But it's an area that is definitely one that is a challenging area for them. In terms of ranking, which these different areas, risk management is the second highest challenging area as far as supply chain is concerned, and the first one is so-called, well, it's information management or so-called visibility, as it is, the visibility is the standard term used in the supply chain terminology. So visibility is the number one challenge, and the risk management is the second. The other area that is mentioned as a challenge is customer involvement. So in a lot of planning that is done by these executives and other type of executives, the numbers basically show that involvement of a customer is not as, or customer is not as involved in the decision-making process, or their input is not taken into consideration as much as suppliers are. And that's an interesting also finding. So when about 80% or so of suppliers are involved in product design and so forth, only about 60 some percent, 62, 63% are involved in the design of products and so on and so forth. So you would think that in a particular product design activity, customers would be involved more. But the findings from this particular study indicate that suppliers are, there's more suppliers involved as opposed to customers involved. So in other words, so the customer is second and the supplier is ranked one insofar as product design. Insofar as supply chain systems design, we find the same type of trend. So suppliers are involved at a higher percentage as opposed to customers. So customers are about 53% or so involvement, and suppliers are used at a rate of about 68% or so. So these numbers are interesting. It kind of shows that these top executives are more involved in not so much long range planning, not so much but more day-to-day type of more type of management of activities. When we looked at cost containment, we looked at information management or risk management. In risk management, they basically say that they don't have the proper tools to be able to manage risk. But surprisingly also, and I forgot to mention as far as the visibility is concerned, and this was kind of interesting, they didn't see a lot of value. They didn't find a lot of value in visibility outside the organization. They didn't, and this was surprising, that they didn't see the value of visibility outside the organization. The concern there was also organizational, so-called organizational silos. In other words, the division between various organizational structures and so forth, and the way that organizations are basically managed. And so they didn't see the value of sharing information with others outside the organization, though, as I said before, that they manage information a little bit better internally as opposed to with other partners, like third-party suppliers and so forth. So the last factor here, globalization as a challenge. As the sourcing becomes global, and as it has become global, the one of the issues with globalization is well, a number of issues, unreliable, based on this study, 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 unreliable, based on they indicated that unreliable delivery, 65% or so of them indicated that in a global system, deliveries are unreliable, 65% of them. About 61% or so of them indicated longer or long lead times and poorer quality in products and systems. And so, as you can see, these are all challenges that still are facing these top executives that have to be dealt with. Some of them are basic problems. Some of them are other than maybe not as basic problems. In order for a supply chain to to be an effective supply chain. Now, this doesn't mean that available supply chains are not improving or not well designed, and not some of the probably factors that we also found through this research is that on-demand supply chain are being designed. Very efficient supply chain are also being designed, but most of these things show incremental values. So we say that it is not sufficient. It is not sufficient for these supply chains to be demand-driven, or for these supply chains to only be efficient, but supply chains, particularly supply chains in the near future, hopefully, and the future in the medium time, will have to be smart. And so, what I'm going to highlight very quickly are some of the criteria of smart supply chain systems. Okay, so excuse me. So this is smart designing a smart supply chain system has to be a strategic undertaking. And three characteristics of a smart supply chain system or system design is instrumentation, interconnectivity, and intelligence. And I'll briefly discuss each one of them. So in traditional supply chain systems, information is gathered, and not so much gathered, but it's supplied by people, by a person. The person enters information into a system and makes decisions, and so on and so forth. In a smart supply chain system, we are going to require that the instrumentation is smart. So it is designed in order for it to be able to make its own data collection, make decisions on data that it is collecting, and so on and so forth. So, for example, a truck will report on itself. A container will report by themselves. An inventory system will count itself. So instead of people going out and counting how much inventory and so forth we have in a system, an inventory system will report on what existing in inventory in real time, whenever it is requested, or even when it's not requested, and that amount of information is sent to another system for it to be used. So when we talk about instrumentation, we're talking about smart devices that are able to collect and make decisions, collect information, analyze it, and send it also to another part of the system. When we talk about interconnectivity or interconnected supply chain systems, we're talking about customers, we're talking about suppliers, different operational technologies that are used within the supply chain system, and we talk about the IT system in general. All of these different parts of the supply chain system have to be interconnected. So at the beginning of the presentation, where I talked about uh, Internet of Things, and that's the main technology that we're going to be using to be able to interconnect all these different parts of a supply chain system. The last part, the intelligent part, and I'll just briefly also comment on that. These supply chain systems have to be intelligent, and so just to give you some examples, they have to be able to be capable of learning and making decisions by themselves to some degree, and I emphasize to some degree. They have to have some degree of autonomy, at least for some part or in some part of the system. So, for example, a smart supply chain system can reconfigure routing when some disturbance occurs somewhere. So that decision the system makes, not a person makes, but the system works based on a certain set of input that the system has captured, looked at, analyzed, and does reconfiguring of different routes of trucks or whatever the system of transportation might be. So that is a characteristic that a smart supply chain system should be able to have. Of course, these systems have to be able to make decisions in real time, and they have to, but maybe most importantly, and hopefully in the near future, these systems have to be able to anticipate events and act on those forecasts or on those predictions, to be able to not just react to something, but have to act based on future information. And these are the three main characteristics of what I call a smart supply chain system. So if we look at some of the technological trends, and I see my time here, but if we look at some of the technological trends as far as artificial intelligence, and since we're talking about smart systems in general, if we look at who is funding what, if China 48% equity funding as far as artificial intelligence, the United States 38%, and the rest of the world 13%. So that gives you an idea of what type of attention is being given to this type of futuristic technologies, and by what countries. And so the future is going to be dominated by those that are going to invest in these type of technologies. So, okay. So very briefly then, what are some of the solutions that we may propose? There was another study that was done in about 3 years ago. This stems from a study that was done 3 years ago by GE, and indicated that about 250, about 80% or so out of the 250 or so decision makers, that they believe that the Internet of Things actually is going to be transformational to the industry. Okay, it is going to change the industry, but only roughly about the same percentage of those that were surveyed indicated that they do not have a mature plan in place. So yes, we do believe that this technology is great and so on and so forth, but we don't necessarily have a good plan on how to implement it. This does not mean that it is not being implemented at all. It is, but more so in silos, silos of implementation, silos of, as we used to call them in the, in my time, I guess, when we were emphasizing, automation and so forth, more so islands of automation more than anything else. So what do we need to do? We need to think big and start small. So in other words, think big. We have to have a plan. We have to have a roadmap. We have to have to develop a strategic plan of so therefore we need to understand what this 4.0 type of tools and technology is going to be able to do for us as an organization and develop a strategic plan on how to embrace this technology. Within that strategic plan, then the recommendation here is to start small and build on that. Okay, so again, very quickly, the metric here is to think big and start small. We have to develop a culture that is data-driven. We have to be able to make sure that we can measure our progress as we go. So we need to rethink how we train people and how to make people involved in this type of exercise. So grow teams that can define the problem space. In order for them to define the problem space, they have to understand the problem space. They have to be able to assess solutions based on metrics. So all decision making, if we are making a decision on the return on investment or whatever, then it would have to be driven by certain metrics. And that is something that needs to be done. Existing IT infrastructure is quite fragmented, as I'm saying here. So we need to find ways to integrate, not just way, but we have to also develop plans to integrate. We talked about visibility before, and visibility within and outside an organization, and we see that is to some degree existing within, but almost non-existent outside. And that is not something that is going to help us progress along these lines. We have to be able to adapt and use new technologies and business applications. So advanced data analytics, for example, data management systems. So in order for us to be able to use methods and to be able to manage risk, for example. For that, we have to be able to develop new skills, people that are educated and people that are trained to be able to perform this type of task. And not only that, but they also have to be able to embrace this kind of technology as part of their current training. Cloud-based applications, we have to be able to use cloud-based applications for a number of reasons, but mainly to collect, analyze, and distribute data across the value chain. So in terms of what I'm calling horizontal integration, embrace radical new approaches to business. So we have to basically understand that today's business environment is very different than what used to be. So we need to be moving from what I'm calling sense and respond to predict and act. So we can't just react to something. We have to reading information from a system and react to it. We have to be able to predict. Some of the things, nowadays we are going through this particular pandemic, and had we had a reliable supply chain system that was more predictive than reactive, then we probably would have fared, at least from a logistical standpoint, much better. We need to be able to use smart supply chain systems to tailor to individual customer needs, and there are some applications of that in certain type of industries. In the medical industry, that is done to some degree. We have to align research and development, procurement, purchasing, and so forth, all the different functions throughout an organization. And these are some of the recommendations in terms of how we should organize and skill development. But new skills, individual and organizational skills, have to be developed. We have to develop a new way of thinking. If we're already thinking about Industry 5.0, where people and technology are going to be collaborating or making things, so we have to think differently. We have to empower. We can't rely on these hierarchical structures, top-down approaches. We have to empower people in terms of funding and decision-making. And so I quickly close with that. And this is my last slide. Are we already there? Because we're already talking about Industry 5.0. Thank you.